What's on your mind?
Nothing. What do you think animals should be not killed?
Because they want to live, right? You want to live, so it's wrong to kill you,
No.
right? They have friends and families that they care about. They enjoy a warm, sunny day, good food, fresh air, room to play
But
around.
we want to eat. But we want to eat.
Yeah.
But we want to eat.
Okay, well, okay, look, how about this? You want to live just like the animals, right? You feel pain and you want to live and you enjoy the nice sunny day and hanging out with your friends, but I want to eat and you're made out of meat. So, should I kill you and eat you?
Yes.
Okay, bud.
Hello.
Hello.
We've talked a few times with Believe Chase.
Yeah, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Pretty good. About to get obliterated by a philosophy wizard here. Come on, put me in my place.
Oh, oh, geez, you don't need to go that far. I'm just a guy with opinions.
I'm just some dude on the internet.
So, Chase, one thing you talk about a lot with being equal is speciesism. So, if I had to ask you, how do you define speciesism?
Sure. So, like, speciesism is similar to racism or sexism. It's discrimination based on what species somebody's born into. So, if we were to say that it's wrong to kill a dog, but fine to kill a pig, that would be speciesism because there's no legitimate difference between dogs and pigs, right? Yeah, they look a little different and whatever, you know. One has a twirly tail and the other has a fluffy tail, and they make different noises and stuff, but neither of them mean us any harm, and they both feel pain and pleasure, and they want to live, and they have friends and all that stuff. So we should not discriminate based on species. So, or if we were to say humans matter but animals don't, that would also be speciesism because we are animals, we are mammals. So nobody gets to choose what body they're born into, and there's nothing wrong with being different. So if we're against racism and sexism, we should also be against speciesism and just be nice to everybody. It's pretty simple. It does not mean in the same way, it's not exactly analogous to racism because, like with racism, we're saying like, black folks and white folks are equal, right, in all ways. Like, is there no legitimate difference between those animals? But with between humans, the human animal, right? But between an ant and a human, there's quite a lot of differences, right? Or between even an ant and a pig, or a pig and a human, right? There's going to be pretty substantial differences between those animals. And, or if we look at a mentally disabled adult human, right, who's severely mentally disabled, there's going to be a huge difference between that person and a normally functioning, member of society, right? But we don't want to use those reasons like arbitrary differences that we can't control that are not relevant to morality or our decision as to whether or not we should stab somebody, whether the fact that somebody was born into this group or that group with this race or this sex or this species or whatever of these things that are just irrelevant. What we need to focus on is their sentience. With humans who have mental disabilities, you might value somebody who has a higher intelligence. If do or die, push comes to shove, like you might give more value to somebody else because they're able to like contribute to society in more ways. They're more sentient. They may be able to suffer in more ways than the severely disabled person. But just because you would give maybe value to one of those other doesn't give you the right to stab either of them if you don't need to, right? And that's all we're saying. So abolish ableism,
Mhm.
abolish racism, sexism, speciesism, homophobia, nationalism, all this stuff. It's ridiculous. So you don't have to value animals to the same degree that you value humans. Just value animals more than you value your taste buds or a snack, and just don't stab them.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so what I do want to ask, and what I think is interesting, is that when it comes to speciesism, it does sound like you think that the human shell has no real value in determining someone's moral worth. It is their mind.
Yeah, I think
Is that
that's
correct, you'd say?
I think that's fair to say. Like generally speaking, like I don't think we should be concerned about what shell somebody's in, what body they're born into, right? I think that the functioning of their mind is what's more relevant, and that's where um, uh, sentience comes from is their brain and nervous system.
Hmm. So I do want to ask, um, if there was a human with a intelligence level scaled down to that of, let's say, a pig, so they have the same life expectancy, the same family members, the same, just everything is adjusted except for their species. One is a human, one is a pig, and you can only save one from a burning building. Would that be just a coin flip to you, or would you value one over the other for any reason?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think I need to just get clarification on what you mean by equalizing all the situations, right? So do you mean that like so? So when you said that they have the same family members, like that's one of the things that concerns me because you already mentioned things that are relevant to me, like their level of sentience, judged basically by their intelligence level. And so you equalize that. You have a human who is mentally disabled such that they're only as smart as a pig. Okay, so that's equal. And then then what was the other thing? They have the same lifespan. So usually a human will live to 80 or whatever, versus a pig will live to 12 years old, like a dog, right? But you equalized that. So we'll say they're both only going to live. Maybe the human has
Mhm.
an illness, and they're only going to live another 10 years, just like the pig is 2, and they're only going to live another 10 years. Okay, we got that equalized. Now the other thing though is you mentioned their family members. Generally speaking, I would say that like a human family who loses a human victim of their family member would probably grieve more than a pig family who loses one of their pig family members, right? Just because we're, smarter and able, I think we're more negatively impacted by the loss of a loved one because we can, grieve and be, just all that stuff for longer than they can. They can to some degree, but not to the same as us, I think. So, because animals like live more in the moment, Um, but yeah, so if you're eliminating that, so let's say neither the pig nor the human has any family members who would grieve upon their loss, right? Uh, then if you've equalized all of everything, then yeah, it would probably be a coin flip. I might have some natural bias for my own species, but I might not in that situation because I am oftentimes pretty disappointed by our species. Like the pigs didn't do nothing to us, and we're the ones constantly stabbing them. So there's that. I don't really want to hold this mentally disabled person responsible for the stabbing of those animals, though, because they don't know what they're talking about or what they're doing, right? So they're not culpable for that. So yeah, it might be a coin toss because at that point they're like really, really similar beings in really similar situations, and I don't want either of them to suffer. But some weird situation where I can only save one, I don't know which I would do, but I think I would be like justified in morally justified in picking either of them.
Right. So I was bringing this up because I think it's an interesting intuition pump to show that, I mean, just thinking about that, can you imagine that most people, or at least a large amount of people, would probably save the human in this case for simply being human?
Yeah, unless like I
Like, could
mean,
you see
there's
that?
yeah, but there's a lot of like if it was a dog instead of a pig, and if it was someone's dog, like that person, like a lot of people would save their dog, their companion animal, their friend who they know, rather than some human stranger that they don't know. Like that's legit too, because a lot of people might be worried, like, who is this human? Like, I don't know them. They might be a bad person. I know my dog is a good dude, right? Who ain't trying to hurt nobody, and I have a relationship with my dog, and I love them. I don't know this person, so and that could be a mediator who's saying that, right? So there's different ways that we can, make these evaluations. If I have a relationship with the human but not the pig, then I might be more likely to save the human. But if you equalize that as well, then I guess again it's probably still a coin flip. But I can understand why people would have an inherent bias towards their own group, especially because we were raised in a speciesist culture.
Right. So when that is kept in mind, so you're saying you understand that even if with all these factors adjusted, even with the factors of it doesn't have to be your dog, it doesn't have to be someone you don't know. You can literally just adjust for every single one of these traits and only have the species be different, and people still will kind of err towards their own species. So with this in mind, do you think that would make speciesism more justifiable or more understandable in some cases? Like generally when people say, "Oh, we can kill animals for food because they're less intelligent than us," and they say, and then you're like, "Oh, why can't you kill mentally disabled humans for food then?" And they say, "Oh, because they're human, and I value the human species." Do you think maybe with that thought experiment I just gave, that approach is more sympathetic or more understandable?
What do you mean? Like more sympathetic or more understandable? What approach?
So the approach that someone would take of I value mentally disabled human, even though they have the same level of intelligence as like a pig or a chicken or a cow, because they're human. And I also brought up that previous thought experiment where you would where you would save the human over the pig simply for being human. Do you think that actually can kind of explain or show that speciesism can kind of be justifiable in a lot of people?
No, no, because I don't like I called it a bias, right? Like a bias is by definition like not logical or justified. It's just it's something that we all have biases in a lot of different areas in our lives, for different reasons. The main reasons are the way our parents taught us and the way our society teaches us with social norms and our so we have these biases that we need to try to surpass or justify to the point where they're not a bias. Like just because people would choose, generally speaking, just because people would choose the human over the pig in that situation, even though the pig and the human are equalized in intelligence and family members and all that stuff, that doesn't make it rational. That just shows their inherent bias. And what I'm saying is these biases should be overcome, critically examined and thrown out the window as much as possible, right? Because that's the same thing that would justify, quote unquote, justify racism. Because a white person would say, "Oh well, I just have this natural bias towards my own group because I spent more time with them and I don't really know any black people or whatever. So I just like my own group more, and I'm going to give them preferential treatment. And in fact, I'm going to stab black people because they're not white, even though I don't need to." Like, doesn't make any sense. Not a justification for racism, right? So the idea is like break free of that bias and overcome the social indoctrination that our parents taught us, this prejudice against certain animals or certain humans or whatever it may be, and say, look at it from the victim's perspective and say, well, I wouldn't want to be treated like that if I was different.
So do you think that, I guess what I would break that down to is just to say that one could hold that racist value even if you yourself had no prejudice. And just like in the same way I could say maybe I'm prejudiced towards animals in favor of humans, I'm not prejudiced to whites in favor or to against blacks in favor of whites.
Well, you might as well be.
I
That's
mean,
the
I don't
point.
think there's really a contradiction.
No, you might as well be. Like, it's the same methodology of coming to a conclusion. It's looking at arbitrary differences and using our irrational bias to come to a violent conclusion.
I mean, you're kind of using like loaded language there, I would say. Like you're saying arbitrary, but I would say that these are all kind of arbitrary to some extent.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean,
that's why it's not a justification for violence. Zoom, what color are
I'm
your...
saying they're all arbitrary, even sentience.
No, because sentience is what determines the ability to feel pain and the desire to stay alive. So that's what differentiates a human from a rock. A rock is not sentient, so it doesn't matter if you kick it down the road. You kick a human down the road, it's a big problem because the human is sentient, able to feel pain, doesn't want to be kicked.
Right, we value that, but I would say that your valuing of those things would be arbitrary because you
No.
could say, I don't care about someone else's desire to live.
Yeah, and that would be
It means
irrational.
nothing.
That would be irrational because you wouldn't want someone to think that way of you because that would put you in danger. So that model, that philosophical line of argument would lead to an absurd conclusion that destroys the self. That would put you in harm's way. So I don't think that's a good idea for you to hold to that position. And again, like you can access that knowledge by simply using empathy and putting yourself in the perspective of your victim.
Well, I wouldn't say necessarily. You could, I mean, maybe you would avoid acting on those impulses if you knew it would hurt you, but that doesn't mean if you knew you could get away with it, you wouldn't do it.
I know,
Because you can
but
still say,
yeah, but you can
I
think.
value myself, I don't value anyone else.
Yeah, but if you look, we lead by example, whether we want to or not. And when we promote those ideas, or if we live in such a way, it's gonna likely lead to people getting pissed at us that we killed their loved one or whatever it was, and they're gonna seek revenge. And so it just ups the likelihood of the cops coming after us, or family members of the victim coming after us, or all kinds of stuff. So better to just not do it. And I don't know. Where are you at now?
I'm just saying that I think what you're saying is interesting, but I ultimately think that comes down to like applied ethics and pragmatism. It doesn't really get to the crux of why wouldn't somebody sway. These all come down to our own arbitrary, I guess, desire to avoid pain, or desire to feel empathy for other people, or desire to promote our interests in the world. Like, I mean, I feel like what I'm thinking is that all of these things can just be reduced infinitely down, and they're just going to kind of come down to our arbitrary feelings.
Yeah, I just really don't think
And
it's
that,
arbitrary. I totally disagree that it's arbitrary for me to look at scientific evidence that demonstrates that both you and dogs and pigs are sentient beings because you have a brain and a nervous system and are therefore able to feel pleasure and pain, and that you have mental states like joy and fear and physical sensations like, yeah, pain and pleasure, and families and a life waiting, a future waiting to be enjoyed, a life that matters to you. And I care about that. My bad. Like, should I not care about that? Is that what you're recommending? Or like, because I just do, right? I want others to care about me. I care about others. I used to be really violent and selfish, and I feel really bad about that time where I was hurting humans and animals, and it didn't lead to anywhere productive for anybody, including myself. And so I'm trying to like help the world in more ways than I hurt it, and I just don't. I don't see why we would want to live any other way or come up with excuses for why to hurt others when we don't need to.
right. I'm more just pointing out, or what I'm just trying to point out is it seems like you are very passionate about this, and I don't blame you for that. I also don't like to hurt other people, I would say, or to do these violent things. But I'm just saying that just because you're passionate about that and just because you feel strongly about it doesn't necessarily make it arbitrary. That's my only point.
Yeah, but no, I'm not saying that it's not. I'm not saying that your reasons are arbitrary simply because I'm passionate. Like, I'm saying your reasons are arbitrary because they're in the same category as race and sex and intelligence level and what nation someone was born in. Species membership is the same type of arbitrary thing and is not a valid justification for needless violence against helpless animals. So, Zoom, what color are your eyes?
They're green.
Green? Ah, dang, Zoom, I got bad news. But we all, we had a discussion, and folks with green eyes, it just gotta go. Nothing personal. Like, we don't hate you. It's just you can't be around here no more, and we've got all these knives that we gotta put to use. It's unfortunate, but it's gotta happen. So, sorry, arbitrary discrimination,